Have you ever wondered why you feel divided? As if the person you want to be lives in the future, while the person you are repeats the past? Why some days you move like a force of nature, and other days you collapse into inertia, seduced by the familiar comforts of failure? William James, the father of American psychology, understood this conflict long before it had a name. He knew that the human being is not merely a thinker, but a creature of repetition, a system of impulses, hardened into tendencies, and eventually into identity. He knew, and this is the truth you must face, that your character is not written in your desires, but in your habits. You are not what you wish for. You are not your potential. You are what you repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not a moment of glory. It's not found in applause or in the surge of one brilliant decision. It is a slow becoming, forged in repetition, sealed by will, and carved into the nervous system like the grooves of a river over time. Not lightning, but erosion. Not spectacle, but substance. To James, the human self is a bundle of habits. Reactions trained into reflex. Thoughts turned to default. Emotion turned into echo. You do not need to be ruled by them, but you will be, unless you intervene. Every time you react in anger, you reinforce anger. Every time you delay your purpose, you solidify procrastination. And the more often a particular act is repeated, the more it becomes part of your fixed biological machinery. Here lies the quiet terror. You may be practicing your own downfall. So look at your day, not your vision board, not your affirmations, but the raw rhythm of your daily life. What do you practice when no one is watching? Are your rituals leading you toward strength or submission, toward clarity or collapse? Habit, James taught, is the enormous flywheel of society, the hidden force behind greatness and degradation alike. It is not glamorous, it is not loud, but it governs your future with mechanical precision, and it does not ask your permission. He wrote that the great thing in education and in life is to make automatic and habitual, as early as possible, those actions which are useful to our purpose, not just for efficiency, but because the soul becomes what it repeats. Attention is a muscle, will is a flame, and if you do not train them through conscious repetition, they decay into weakness. This is not romantic, it is physiological. Your nervous system learns by doing, and every repeated action, no matter how small, rewires the brain's circuitry until your entire being becomes an instrument of what you've rehearsed. William James warned that we are spinning our fates, good or evil, and never to be undone except by heroic effort. But make no mistake, such effort is possible. That is the power buried inside habit. Most people wait to feel motivated. They wait to become the person they imagine, without ever laying the foundation for that person to exist. But James didn't believe in waiting. He believed in will, the voluntary effort of attention, choosing to direct the mind, again and again, toward the higher path, even when it felt unnatural, especially when it felt unnatural. Because what is unnatural today becomes second nature tomorrow. The man who trains himself to wake early, to work when tired, to speak truth when silence is safer, does not merely do discipline, he becomes it. His muscles, his synapses, his very breath begin to align with a new way of being, and it begins, always, with repetition. This is the brutal, beautiful secret. Character is not built by thought alone. It is built by action, repeated, embodied, lived, until what once required immense effort becomes instinct. If you want to know who someone is, Don't listen to their words. Watch their habits. Watch what they default to under pressure. Watch where they place their attention. That, William James would argue, is their soul. And what of you? When the day presses in, when the mind wanders, when emotion swells, what do you do? Do you choose the hard path of will? Or do you return to comfort, to distraction, to habit, not chosen, but inherited? There is no freedom without conscious repetition. There is no excellence without 1,000 invisible decisions made when no one sees. Because in the end, James believed something radical, that the human being could, through willful habit, become something entirely other than their past. That greatness was not born, but installed, through action. So what are you installing today? Excellence does not announce itself. It does not arrive with fanfare or thunder. It begins in silence, in the unseen choices that layer one upon another until they become immovable. William James saw this with striking clarity, that the path to greatness does not require genius, but grit. Not a single act of will, but a sustained application of it. The small, voluntary effort, repeated daily, slowly reconfigure the architecture of the self. To James, this was not philosophical abstraction, it was biological reality. The brain is not a static organ, it is plastic, shapeable, and utterly obedient to repetition. Neural pathways are carved like trails in a forest. Walk them often enough, and they become roads. Walk them too long, and they become prisons. So consider this. What roads have you carved with your own behavior? Are you building a fortress of discipline? Or have you laid bricks of avoidance and impulse, one after another, until the walls close in? You may believe you're in control, but you are ruled by what you repeat. James said that 99% of our activity is purely automatic. You wake, you move, you think, not freely, but by momentum. Unless, and this is the crux, unless you intervene, unless you reclaim attention. That sacred faculty which James called the root of will itself. He wrote, the faculty of voluntarily bringing back a wandering attention over and over again is the very root of judgment, character, and will. Not talent, not intellect, not passion, but tension. And attention is a flame that must be fed. Every time you return to focus, despite fatigue or temptation, you are not just completing a task. You are reshaping your inner landscape. You are disciplining the mind to serve something higher than comfort. And that act, small though it may seem, is the making of character. The Stoics spoke of virtue as the alignment of behavior with reason. James would agree, but he would point deeper, toward biology, habit, and will, because there can be no virtue, no reason, no true strength, unless the body itself is trained to obey the higher aim. And the body learns through doing. This is why your environment matters. James knew that habit is contagious, that behavior spreads like wildfire through imitation and exposure. Surround yourself with mediocrity, and excellence will always feel foreign. But place yourself among the disciplined, and your nervous system will begin to adapt. You will rise, not because of inspiration, but because your internal rhythm changes through osmosis. And yet, no environment can substitute for internal work, because the real enemy is not outside, it is within, in your love of ease, your fear of failure, your addiction to distraction. James warned against the inertia of character, the way old habits harden into fate. That is why effort must be early, frequent, and unrelenting. Your nervous system is always learning. The question is, what are you teaching it? Every time you let emotion dictate your action, you reinforce impulsivity. Every time you delay purpose, you train procrastination. And every time you choose the right path despite resistance, you carve a deeper groove for greatness. It is not heroic. It is not cinematic. It is rarely visible, but it is everything. The world tells you to wait for clarity, for energy, for motivation. But William James understood, those are consequences, not causes. Clarity comes after you commit. Energy follows effort. Motivation is born from momentum. If you wait to feel ready, you will never begin. You must act before you believe. You must do in order to become. James was relentless in this conviction. He believed the moral life depended not on ideas, but on trained action, on building habits so sacred, so consistent, that when the storm comes, as it always does, your character holds. Excellence is not made in crisis. It is revealed by it. So let the world sleep. Let the masses drift in comfortable chaos. You will rise, not for show, not for praise, but because you are training the machine of your being to align with something higher. You are not what happens to you. You are not what you feel. You are what you practice. This is not self-help. This is self-construction. And here lies the burning question. What future self are you rehearsing day by day through the unconscious theater of your habits? Because you are rehearsing something. Every time you scroll, delay, react, numb, you are voting for a weaker version of yourself. And every time you return to your task, your purpose, your higher aim, despite resistance, you are voting for excellence. One choice at a time, one repetition at a time. And these repetitions are not forgotten. They are you. There is a kind of terror in this truth. You are not becoming the person you dream of. You are becoming the person you repeat. What you rehearse in the shadows of your daily life, that is the shape your destiny takes. William James did not see this as poetic metaphor. He saw it as scientific fact. The will, the attention, the behavior, all fold into the machinery of the brain. And that machinery does not care what you hope to become. It only obeys what you do. You wake up, and you are already becoming someone. The rituals begin before the sun rises. The first thought, the first action, the first indulgence, or the first act of discipline. And by the end of the day, you've cast votes. Not for success or failure in the eyes of the world, but for who you are. Your nervous system, your emotional tone, your ability to focus, love, act, endure, all of it shaped not in grand moments, but in microscopic ones. James believed the greatest weapon we have is voluntary attention, the ability to direct the mind toward what we choose, not what merely seduces us. This act of sustained focus, even when difficult, is not just noble, it is necessary. Because the alternative is passivity, and passivity in the mind is the death of the will. It is the surrender to chaos. So consider the days where your mind drifts, where impulse takes the reins. You think you've merely wasted time, but you've done more. You've trained your system to expect drift. You've rehearsed weakness, and the body remembers. The neurons connect, the circuits fire. And before long, it becomes harder to return, because the path back has grown cold. James once wrote, "No one can honestly affirm an ideal without wishing to embody it, and no one can wish to embody it without setting to work to realize it." That is the moral weight of habit. It makes ideals either truth or treason. You cannot say you value strength, then repeatedly choose softness. You cannot claim to want wisdom while habitually feeding the mind distraction. You cannot seek transcendence while enslaving yourself to comfort. And most of all, you cannot wish to be excellent. You must train it. Repetition with intention. That is the path. Willing your attention, moment after moment, back to the task, back to the ideal, back to the future self you're sculpting. It is not glamorous. It is not fast, but it is the only road. And here's the paradox. At first, you fight to form the habit, but eventually, the habit forms you. Your instincts shift, your taste changes, the voice of the old self fades, and something new emerges. Not the motivated self, not the inspired self, but the trained self. The one who no longer needs to choose because the choice has been engraved. That is freedom. Not the freedom to follow impulse, but the freedom to ignore it. Not the freedom to indulge every desire, but the freedom to rise above them. Because the man or woman who has mastered their attention, their reactions, their rhythms, is unconquerable. Excellence is not a peak to reach, but a direction to walk. You never arrive, you align. And every day with every act of will, every repeated gesture of integrity, you close the gap between who you are and who you could be. James didn't believe in perfection. He believed in progress, in the capacity of the human soul to build itself through choice. Not once, but relentlessly, until the will itself becomes automatic, until the self becomes, quite literally, new. So if you want to change your life, you must change your days. Not your thoughts, not your dreams, but your days. You must treat your habits not as tools, but as sacred rituals, because each one is either killing you or making you. There is no neutral repetition. And here is where the power begins, with one act. One small, chosen act. You rise when it's easier to sleep. You focus when it's easier to drift. You breathe instead of reacting. These are not small wins. These are psychological revolutions. Because you are turning the machinery of your brain, slowly, painfully, purposefully, toward greatness. Do it once, it feels strange. Do it 100 times, it becomes a trait. Do it 1,000 times, it becomes your nature. This is how giants are built. Not by birthright, not by brilliance, but by repetition, forged in silence, powered by will. Every act, no matter how small, is a vote for the person you wish to become, or a retreat into the one you swore you'd outgrow. William James understood this with profound clarity. The machinery of the human being is not driven by flashes of brilliance or rare moments of passion. It is driven by the repeated act, the mundane, the practiced, the consistent. It is driven by what you do when the fire inside you has gone out, but your body still moves forward. He did not romanticize the mind as a mystical force. He saw it as a living instrument, a biological organ capable of rewiring itself. But it only obeys those who understand the law. You become the pattern you repeat, not just mentally, but physiologically. Every repetition, every thought, movement, reaction, behavior is pressed into the nervous system, becoming your operating system. This is why James believed in habit as destiny. You may wish for a better life. You may dream of strength, excellence, greatness. But if you do not train yourself into it, train your breath, your attention, your instinct, you will remain a slave to the habits you refuse to confront. So let us speak plainly. You do not have time to waste. Every day you repeat the old script, the script becomes stronger. The neural grooves dig deeper. The automatic responses embed themselves. And without intervention, Without the willful disruption of your rhythm, you will become a slave to a self that no longer serves you. This is not dramatic, it is mechanical, and it should scare you. But it should also awaken you, because this also means that every small act of discipline, every time you show up, every time you override your lower impulse, every time you bring your attention back to the task, the goal, the moment, you are building something real, something lasting, something that will carry you when motivation fails. You are not the exception to the law. You are not the one who will magically transform without effort. If you wish to rise, you must train for it. If you wish to lead, to build, to love well, to live with depth, you must earn that capacity through daily alignment. James said it plainly, "The greatest discovery of my generation is that a human being can alter his life by altering his attitudes of mind." But he knew the real key was in action, not just thought. He knew that once you act, even if you don't believe, the action itself will pull belief behind it. That behavior leads, and the soul follows. This is the difference between those who live with purpose and those who drift in the tide of habit. One takes control of the lever, the daily choices, the rhythms, the routines. The other hands that control over to the unconscious and becomes whatever the world molds them to be. But you can choose. You can interrupt the cycle. You can build the self that does not need external discipline because the discipline has become you. That is the highest form of freedom, not the ability to do whatever you want, but the ability to choose what is right, even when what you want screams otherwise. And it starts, not tomorrow, not next week, now, with the next breath, with the next moment of hesitation, where you choose to lean in instead of lean away, where you choose to follow through instead of shrink back, where you prove to yourself that you are not your past, you are your pattern, and patterns can be rewritten. This is not about obsessing over perfection. It is about committing to process. You may fall, you may forget, but if you keep returning, if you keep casting votes for the self you long to become, your biology, your instincts, your thoughts, your life will bend toward that vision. Not by accident, but by practice. And this practice over time becomes peace. Not because life gets easier, but because you become stronger, more grounded, more disciplined, more capable of withstanding chaos without collapsing into it. That is the prize. That is the silent reward of excellence formed through habit. And if there is one truth to remember, one law to live by, it is this: you are not what you feel. You are not what you want. You are what you repeat. And so the circle completes itself, silently, powerfully, where all growth begins, in the repetition of willful action. William James, who stared directly into the depths of human consciousness, knew that no transformation begins with some divine spark or outside rescue. It begins with a simple, unromantic choice: to do the harder thing again and again until it becomes natural, until it becomes you. Excellence is not a destination. It is a direction, a rhythm, a vow repeated through your behavior, not your promises. James believed that character was not inherited nor bestowed. It was installed, line by line, act by act, through the ritual of what you practice when no one is watching. And the irony, the exquisite irony, is that what feels unnatural at first becomes the only thing that feels real in the end. The man who trains himself to act with integrity, though it chafes against every comfort, eventually loses his taste for deception. The woman who builds herself to be disciplined, though every cell in her body begs for ease, one day looks back and no longer recognizes the version of herself who waited for motivation to strike. This is the death of the old self. This is the resurrection of the chosen self, the one created through repetition, sculpted by will, and revealed in pressure. You don't become great by accident. You become great because you chose to practice excellence in secret, in silence, in the mundane hours when the rest of the world was asleep, distracted, scrolling, delaying. And this is the final liberation. You stop needing the world to see. You stop needing the reward, the audience, the external validation. Why? Because you no longer act for applause. You act from identity. You no longer act to impress. You act because your nervous system craves the actions that keep you aligned with your highest self. The habits are no longer shackles. They are the rails of freedom, guiding you toward clarity, strength, and grounded power. You have become what you repeated. And now, repetition is no longer resistance. It is ease. It is joy. It is quiet self-respect. This is the power that James hinted at, the quiet revolution of habit, not the kind sold to you in books promising change in 30 days, but the sacred kind, the slow, steady kind, the kind forged in discomfort, in solitude, in repeated small victories, the kind that cannot be faked, because there will come a moment, maybe soon, maybe in crisis, when the structure of your habits will rise up to meet you. And in that moment, you will not have to think, or pretend, or perform. You will simply become, because you are not your thoughts. You are not your history. You are not your potential. You are what you have trained. And if you have trained excellence, then excellence will answer. So leave behind the fantasy of who you could be. Let it die. In its place, build a rhythm so true, so refined, so relentless, that your very presence becomes a testament to what is possible when a human being takes control of their repetition. The fire you seek is not in some distant tomorrow. It is here, in this breath, in this next act. And the question is no longer who you are. It's only this: what will you do again? Then do it, again, and again, and again, until one day, without warning, you rise and realize you have become the very thing you once only reached for. You are no longer practicing excellence. You are it.